a blind eye. Going for a jog should not be a death sentence. Sleeping in your own home should not be a death sentence.
Playing video games with your nephew should not be a death sentence.
Shopping in a store should not be a death sentence. Business as usual should not be life-threatening. I stand against hate.
I stand against hate.
I stand against hate.
I stand against hate.
I will stand against hate in love. I will make my presence known.
And killer cops must be prosecuted. They are murderers. We can turn the tide. It is time to take responsibility. Call out hate. Step up and take action.
On this episode, we discuss the myth, the power, and the crime of white guilt. Or so we're led to believe. Welcome to the Soul Trap. Let's pursue truth, not propaganda.
Tell them all. Whoever comes, whoever it is, I'll kill them. I'll kill them all.
Very recently, those of you that are listening now, if you had been in our Wednesday evening service or listening online, you would have heard some of the material that I'm about to cover. On Wednesday night, recently, I have been covering the covenants in the Bible. We began with the Edenic covenant, the Abrahamic or the Adamic covenant, and then we came to the Noahic covenant, a very apropos subject for the times in which we live. Hurriedly, admittedly so, I rushed through the first part of it, per se the doctrinal implications of it, because I wanted to lay a groundwork for some of the truths that I was able to get to on that Wednesday night, but truths that I was not able to actually delve into a great deal simply because of the setting and the time. Well, if you're watching now on the Soul Trap or listening, I want to dive into those subjects. And quite frankly, they are subjects that have to do with race. There's no way of getting around that. It is certainly not something that has been brought to the forefront by the average person. I believe the average person, white, black, red, yellow, purple, pink, polka dot, I don't care what their color is, I believe the average person wants to be left alone. They want to make a bit of money, they want to have a vacation, a nice car, and they want to have time with their family, they want their children to be educated, they want to be able to get health care when they need it and food on their table when they need it. In other words, I think when you leave the average person alone, for the most part, they're able to manage and get along. But unfortunately, race has been thrust upon us. Not because there is really truly a racial problem, but because what we have at stake are two cataclysmically different ideologies that are at war, that are indeed incompatible. You see, the fact of the matter is, for a long time, we have seen our nation split and we haven't wanted to admit it. But this past election, if you didn't understand it before, should have shockingly and glaringly told you we have a real problem in America. Not that Donald Trump is the greatest president since sliced bread, and I certainly don't believe him to be the second coming of George Washington. But how any sentient human being could bring themselves to vote for Hillary Clinton. Over and over and over, our country is split between two. Between Bush and Gore. Between Clinton and Trump. And it is not an issue of taxes, and it's not an issue really of even abortion, and it's not an issue of gay rights. It is an issue of ideology. One is an ideology that still, however tenuous, is rooted in the Judeo-Christian ethic and Western civilization. The other is firmly planted, growing and thriving in the fertile soil, which is Marxism. What we are seeing is a collision between Western civilization and the Judeo-Christian ethic and a neo-Marxist revival and revolution. And so I simply want to make some statements that I made at the end of that message on that Wednesday night, and I want to dive into it a little bit deeper with a little bit more detail. First, let me make a statement, and I'm sure that some of these will sound very difficult to hear because our ears are trained to hear not truth but propaganda. But I want to say, first of all, that unity, peace, respect, liberty are never and have never been the result of forced diversity or unguided diversity. In other words, the misguided idea of a world of one with no differences, no language, no barrier, no nationalities, no kindred, no walls, is a utopia that is not just false in anecdotal sense, in other words, the way the world works, but it is false biblically. I remind you that it is not man that divided man. It is God that divided man. It was God that divided man in Genesis, in a sense, in chapter number 6, when he saw that Noah was perfect in his generations. It was God that divided man in Genesis chapter number 9, and again in chapter number 11, and again in the book of Deuteronomy, as he clearly, ethnically, nationally divided the nations. And when you run that all the way through the Bible, you find that even in the millennium, there is still a division of nations. And in fact, Revelation chapter number 22 uses the word nations. You would think that if we were to arrive at some utopia, there would be no nations, no walls, no differences. But in this creation, God has set a pattern, and that pattern cannot be changed without dire consequences. I'm not stating that one nation is better than another or one civilization is better than another. I'm not belittling or trying to be a supremacist in any way, shape, or form. What I am saying is that divisions are necessary because divisions are divine. The whole premise, the entire premise of multiculturalism being a success and a validation and a power to a country, well, first of all, it's just historically inaccurate. You can track how multiculturalism, without being absorbed into a singular culture, has been the actual damnation of a nation. But the fact is, multiculturalism is a biblical and spiritual fallacy. And the fact is, folks, it is not sin for one cultural group to feel more comfortable with another. I'll take it one step further. It is certainly not sin for one cultural group to feel a sense of pride, an acceptable biblical pride in their people. I'm proud of being Attilas. Most are in jail, granted, but I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of my mother's side of the family, Lebanese, coming over from Syria and Lebanon. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being a Baptist. And quite frankly, I'm proud of being white. I don't think that that's racist. I think Western civilization has its glory and has its shame. If I were a black man, I think I would be proud of my heritage. If I were an Asian, I would be proud of being an Asian. If I were Hispanic, I would be proud of that. I don't believe that that makes one racist. Statement number 2. Diversity only works when the right ingredients are mixed, not when you throw a bunch of stuff together. Simply because you put things together doesn't mean that there's a good mixture. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Suppose you were to put coffee and cream and sugar and hazelnut together. Well, that's a good mixture. Those ingredients mix well. But what if you and I were to put together milk and Mountain Dew, Tabasco sauce, and pickle juice? It doesn't work. What if we were to continue to simply add? What if we were to chop up pepperoni and throw it in there and add a little coconut water? Then we can get some Cholula and add it in there. And then maybe we can douse it with lemonade. Simply putting more ingredients doesn't make it better. In fact, it could make the concoction quite toxic. And in the United States of America, what has happened is that we have a mixture of incompatible worldviews. The Judeo-Christian ethic versus the godless, pagan, Marxist ethic. There was a time when it was known, whether you were a slave or not, whether you were poor or not, whether you were white or black or rich or whatever else, that this nation, for all of its foibles and for all of its hypocrisy, fundamentally accepted the premise, one nation under God, the fear of God. Yes, there has always been wickedness, and no, America has not been perfect. But there was a time when it was the base culture that other peoples, while maintaining their racial identity or maintaining their pride in their ethnic background, yet understood that there was something special about America. There was a freedom about America. There was a hope about America. America was indeed that shining city on a hill, that opportunity for freedom. Did it always succeed? No. Did it succeed far more than other countries? 10,000 times yes. But countries were absorbed. The black man with his Sherman-esque 40 acres and a mule. Why was he given that? Because there was a concept, an idea that with hard work, labor, private property, and the guiding hand of providence, the black man as well as the white man, as well as any other colored man, be it Asian, Hispanic, whatever the color may be, there was an understanding that based upon the Judeo-Christian ethic, there was hope. Today, that ethic is at war. It has been eroded, and it is in an onslaught, full-out war against a pagan, neo-Marxist ethic that seeks to destroy whatever vestiges there are of Western civilization. Black Lives Matters, ladies and gentlemen, is not simply a political entity that you and I as Christians can ignore. It is godless. And I made this statement when I was speaking in my church, and I make it here at the Soul Trap. And what I'm about to say is very important, and I trust and hope that you'll hear me and hear me well. It is the duty of every Christian to oppose to his fullest strength Black Lives Matter, the Democratic Party, and the liberal agenda. Because these are not debates between tax rates. These are not debates between simple surface issues. Black Lives Matters, Antifa, the Democratic Party, liberals, they are anti-everything that you stand for if you believe the Bible. They are anti-God, anti-marriage, anti-children, anti-Jew, anti-home, anti-freedom, anti-individual personal liberty, anti-church, as we have come to see. And so what you have going on is a mixture. And you have the myth of diversity. If we can just get more people in, diversity is what makes us strong. No. Ethics, values, morals are what make us strong. Diversity divides. It defiles unless it is unified around a common and right and godly source. Number 3. European, white, Western civilization has made the world a far, far better place in a very profound way. That is a fact. Sounds racist to hear, sounds racist to say, but we are in pursuit of truth. That's what we're in pursuit of. We are in pursuit of the truth. It may sound racist to say, it may sound racist to hear, but our goal is not to be culturally acceptable, politically acceptable. Our goal is to speak the truth. And the fact of the matter is, European white Western civilization has made the world a better place. It's not perfect, and I'm not excusing what other civilizations or exempting what other civilizations have accomplished. As I said, on my mother's side, she's Lebanese. Connections with Syrian. I marvel at the Middle Eastern culture. I marvel at the Asiatic cultures. I marvel at the beauty that is inherent in all human life and in all human cultures. But the fact of the matter is, there is something about the enlargement of Japheth that cannot be denied. You can try your best to want to rewrite the way God has ordered society, but fundamentally it is what it is. It is what it is. If you want a religion, don't come to the Japhethites. But there is something about the enlargement. If you don't believe that, then imagine yourself living in a culture as distant away from European civilization as you possibly can. Have you been to Honduras, in the mountains where Western civilization has not been able to reach? Have you been to Africa and Somalia and Mogadishu and Sierra Leone, Nigeria? Have you been to South Africa where Western civilization, and of course apartheid was wrong, there should have been another solution to the issue, but are you seeing what is happening now as Western civilization is being jettisoned and the absolute collapse? And what about China? Do you want to live in a wet market? Are you in the mood for bat, dog? You say you're being a little bit mean, you're being a little bit ugly. No, I'm being factual. Look at where Western civilization has not touched. Look at where Western civilization has been jettisoned and ask yourself, do you want to live there? Look at the world in which you live. The truth of the matter is it was profoundly shaped and domesticated by European civilization that is simply right now being overrun from without and within. I'm currently reading a book right now, another book on the Foreign Legion, the French Foreign Legion, and of course there were atrocities and there were wrongs when they were in Algeria and other places, yet they also brought stability. They also brought trade. They also brought health care. In other words, to simply be able to draw these arbitrary black and white, right and wrong lines is to show our ignorance, our presentism, our ability to sit in a civilized, domesticated, protected, provided for world by the very people that we now lambaste. The very world that you and I live in that was conquered and molded and shaped and made by those people, we turn around and now believe that we would act differently than they do, or that our current level of morals could somehow be projected back into a world that didn't even have Tylenol, that couldn't even fix a cavity, that had to amputate legs and arms while people were wide awake because they had no anesthesia. We cannot even begin to imagine the world of tigers that our forefathers lived in, and yet we make these broad, sweeping accusations about them while living in the very world that they have domesticated and provided for us. Does it make sense? Look at the world. Rockets which can take men to the moon. Aircraft which can carry hundreds of people thousands of miles away. Computers which have the processing power of hundreds of thousands of people. Arithmetic and geometry, the basics of science which made such flights of technology possible. The telephone, an instrument which enables people thousands of kilometers away from each other to converse. Philosophers, kings, queens, rulers, great causes which have fallen and great causes which have risen. Technological wonders, the likes of which the world could not imagine. The fact of the matter is, white European civilization has given to the world democracy in the form of a democratic republic, a nation that has never been equaled in its freedom, in its system of finance, in its system of government, and, may I say, in its system and ability to be able to correct its own wrongs. Absolutely, there have been great wrongs and atrocities, but the system, which, mind you, was created by white, predominantly Anglo-Saxon men who were yielded to a Judeo-Christian ethic, whether deist or not, they were the ones that gave us the very system which allows us to march today in the streets and not be run over by tanks like happened in Tiananmen Square in China. They have kept us from the revolutions of Cuba and Venezuela. They have kept us from the bloodbaths of Romania and Czechoslovakia. White European civilization gave us the printing press, a simple tool that we take for granted. And yet, the information that we have, the world of books, of reading, of information, the power to grow and read others, for that matter, the canon of literature, the Western canon of literature from which all of the beautiful fruitions of other literatures have arisen from in so many ways, as Camille Paglia has stated, the root from which the tree has grown and blossomed. Alice Walker, who wrote The Color Purple, was able to write The Color Purple based upon the predecessors of that great canon of literature that influenced her and shaped her. The same could be said. And what about the concept of free speech? Try free speech in Angola. Somalia, Saudi Arabia. Nowhere has real freedom of speech been put to the test like it has here in America. Nowhere. And yet, freedom of speech is a bedrock, not of Chinese culture, not of African culture. It is not a bedrock even in Jewish culture today. Go over to Israel and try to be a Christian. Try to open up a Baptist church on the corner street like you could in America with a Muslim mosque. Try to do that. No. It is only in Western civilization, as it has been rooted again, as I say over and over, whatever the flaws, whatever the failures, in the Judeo-Christian ethic. Your freedom of speech, my freedom of speech, the soul trap, was all given to us not by Nigerian forefathers. It was not given to us by Japanese shoguns. It was given to us by white men who were mainly Protestant and profoundly connected to the ethics of the Judeo-Christian religion. And then think about the personal computer. Seems simple enough, but imagine what the world has become like. Imagine what the world would be like. And the inventions don't stop there. They are myriad. The idea that this nation was built on the back of slaves is a farce. At the height of slavery, there was at best 1 million. 1 million slaves in the United States of America. That does not take into account the hundreds and hundreds of thousands and millions of people that worked, that labored. The other day I was watching an HBO, it was on HBO originally, John Adams, and it showed them building Washington, and it was nothing but slaves. There wasn't a white man to be found anywhere. That's farcical. Who designed the stones? Who cut the stones? Who hauled the stones? All of that slave work? Absolutely not. It is revisionary history designed to make you guilty and to fuel the flames of ignorant and unlearned masses, both white, black, red, yellow, whatever the color may be, so that a destruction may be brought about, and from that destruction a new world order created. Now, it does bear a question, and I want to ask this question with no malice of intent and no anger whatsoever. I ask this question in sincerity. If we are to believe the record of evolution, as we are forced and told we should, biological evolution, the question then must be asked, where and what are the results of the African continent and its culture having a head start on all the other cultures? Have they been held down, and why? Why? You see, the fact of the matter is that the current Black Lives Matter issues are not about lifting up the black culture, but about bringing down the entire culture of a nation. I can't remember the book, and maybe some of you listeners can find the book, but I believe it was in one of his not very well-known books where Orwell stated, and I'm paraphrasing here, that socialism, or maybe he wrote it in an article, but socialism, as he saw it, the problem was not so much that they cared for the poor, but they hated the rich. It was not that they truly cared for the poor, but that they hated the rich. And those two are not synonymous. And I submit to you that that is what's going on today. It is not that Black Lives Matter truly care for the black people. For if they did, they would be in Chicago. It is black men that are killing black men in droves, mind you. It is Planned Parenthood that is killing black babies, at least 50%, and that's what we know of. It is not white culture that is destroying the black culture. It is the black culture that is destroying the black culture. If Black Lives Matters and other organizations and other people like Cornel West and others, if they were truly concerned about the black culture, they would be doing something. The fact of the matter is, like Orwell said, the problem with the socialist movement is not that they care for the poor, it's that they hate the rich. And I submit to you that the problem with the racial movement today is not that they care for the black person, but that they hate the white culture, with an intention and a design of ushering in a revelation out of which a new, more deadly Marxism can arise. It is about dealing a death blow to the last vestiges of Western civilization. Now, the fact of the matter is, the myth that white Americans should be guilty and ashamed is a myth that is fundamentally rooted in satanic deception and ignorance. I say this unequivocally without any problem whatsoever about the statement I'm about to make. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as systemic racism. Simply because you want it to be that way, or simply because a young black man has been told by his parents, and their parents by their parents, and their parents by their parents, that there is, doesn't make it so. I can tell you that the sun is made out of marshmallows all day long. I can tell that, write that, teach that, propagate that, but it does not make it so. There is no such thing as systemic racism. What more, we are dealing in a day and time when we look over the issue of European civilization, of what I mentioned earlier, the fallacy of presentism. The idea that we can make sweeping judgments about past actions from the comforts of a world created by those very people who took that action. It assumes that we would be different. It judges the past by morals and norms of the present. The fact of the matter is, when America had slavery, it was common. It has been common for all of history. Africans had African slaves. Asians had slaves. Middle Eastern Arabs dislocated over 15 million slaves. It is very, very interesting to me that nobody seems to be concerned about the filth around the rest of the world. Have you been to India? Have you seen the slums? Have you seen the millions of children? Years ago, there was a picture in an Indian paper of a child suckling the breast of a dog for survival. The caption said, "India feeds her children." Where is our outrage about that? What about in China? What about in the Middle East, where they throw homosexuals off the roof or behead women for taking off their face garb? It is absolutely filthy and hypocritical. And the reality is, it denies the facts in an Orwellian way when it comes to slavery. You can look at them, read them, study them. The reality of the matter is, we are dealing with a situation here that is far beyond what we could possibly imagine. There is a great article written by Ben Shapiro called "How the West Changed the World for the Better." Lest you think it be me in the studio here with our inherent racism, Ben Shapiro has a quaint, good little article. I think he misses getting to the real root of the matter, but nonetheless, he says how the West changed the world for the better. Unfortunately, the terrorists' view of the West isn't limited to white supremacists. It's echoed by intersectional critics of the West, who suggest that Western civilization truly is founded in racial hegemony rather than eternal concepts of truth. In this view, Western civilization is inherently racist, sexist, and bigoted, rooted in hierarchies of power to be torn down through tribal division. The West, they say, doesn't exist. It's a mythos of white power imbibed by white supremacists. But that's not right, obviously. Western civilization does exist, and it is responsible for the vast majority of human gains in history. Thanks to the West, billions of human beings no longer suffer in abject poverty. Thanks to the West, democracy is seen as both the moral and the practical default position for aspiring governments. Thanks to the West, individualism has been able to gain ground against the natural tribalism endemic to human beings. The history of the West isn't a history of unalloyed greatness. It is replete with suffering and tyranny and slavery and misery. But all of those evils are present in every civilization historically. The question is why the West changed the world. The West changed the world, Shapiro writes, because the West isn't based in tribal notions of race, but on creedal notions. Now, I do have to differ with him just a little bit here, and follow my thinking or my train of thought very closely. I do differ here slightly in that I believe, whether consciously or unconsciously, the world has followed a biblical picture of race and culture, whatever you want to call it, that was set and put in motion by God. The fact is that for all of our efforts, we have not been able to tear ourselves away from the established norms of reality, from the cultural parameters established by God in Genesis 9:27. While individual predeterminism is not what is at stake, at any point, at anywhere along the line, an example would be Ruth. Ruth was a Moabitess. Clearly, God said that the Moabites were not to come into the congregation. And yet, though that was a cultural parameter, her individualism was not predetermined. She was able to break out of that in response to faith. Another example would be the Syrophoenician woman. Again, Jesus said it is not meet to give the food to the dogs. There was a cultural parameter there, and yet she was able to break out of that through a personal faith and say, "Yea, Lord, but even the dogs eat which fall from the master's table." And so, although God has established cultural parameters, I do not believe in individual or racial predeterminism. That is nowhere taught in the Bible. But cultural and national and civilization parameters, well, they are taught. And what Ben Shapiro does not want to say, and what is being thrust in our faces, it is Western civilization, and it happens to be that skin color is white. He goes on to write, the same notions rejected by the Christchurch terrorist, as I discuss in my book, The Right Side of History, the West is important only because the philosophy of the West, the ever-shifting balance between Greek reason and Judeo-Christian values, provides the foundation for those gains. We haven't always lived up to the highest principles, and that certainly is true, of either Judeo-Christianity and morality or Greek reason. But by acknowledging the importance of both and building a civilization on the tension between the two, the world has been bettered. Not by communism, not by the Ming Dynasty, not by African culture, by Western, European, white culture based upon a Judeo-Christian ethic. And if that's hard for you to hear, it is because you have been indoctrinated with racism. White racism. Shapiro goes on to write, thanks to Greek tradition, the West accepted other foundational principles. The belief that our purpose lies in our use of reason, and that the universe could be discovered and understood by the human mind. The West broadened the application of Judeo-Christian principles more and more widely over time by applying Greek reason, resulting in the birth of science, human rights, free speech, and free markets. Whenever the West abandoned Judeo-Christian values, the West fell into secular tyranny. Whenever the West abandoned Greek reason, the West fell into theocratic tyranny. The balance between reason and revelation gave us meaning and purpose, and with that meaning and purpose came prosperity. You wouldn't want to live anywhere else other than America. But what built that? Oh, it was built on the backs of slaves. Were they there? Sure. But was it really built on the back of slaves? The West, Shapiro says, is worth defending from those who would define it down to racial solidarity. If we don't, tribalism will reign. Now, beloved, that's what we're seeing today. Look on the news, the attacks that you're seeing. The inner city is tribal. The violence is tribal. I mean, look at it. Look at it. The West is worth defending, Shapiro writes, from those who would define it down to racial solidarity. If we don't, tribalism will reign supreme once more, bringing the bloody ruin it has always brought, grinding the principles we all hold dear into the dust. The problem that Shapiro runs into is that no matter how you slice it, no matter how you want to tiptoe around it, no matter how you want to frame it, when you were talking about the West, you were talking about a color of people. Now, what made them great was not their color, and we must get past that. What made them great was their ethic, their foundation, their connection to that Judeo-Christian, that revelation and then reason. But it was not West Africa. It was not Mexico. It was not the Middle East. And as much as I'm proud of my heritage, it was not the Lebanese. The West was white, for better or for worse. And the problem with this kind of frank talking and this kind of frank truth is that we are made to feel racist and dirty, and we should not. Another issue that to me seems to be at stake is that the only real defenders of Western civilization and the Judeo-Christian ethic that have any insight, that have any reading, seem to be what you could call white supremacists, neo-Nazis. White supremacy and neo-Nazis is not where we want to be. They are wrong. They are anti-Jew, anti-black, anti-color, and that is not what we are proposing. We are not proposing anti-anything, nor are we proposing the elevation of the white race. What we are saying is that what made Western civilization great was the Judeo-Christian ethic, not Marxism, not group identity, not cultural Marxism. If you want West Africa, if you want Nigeria and Somalia, stick with what you got. I don't want that. I don't want Mexico. I don't want the wet market of China. I do not think we will ever really be able to put the genie back in the bottle again. I do believe we're in perilous times and they will only get worse. But I do believe that there should be a willingness to address the reality of what's going on and pass it on to our children, to our families, to our people. We need preachers that read a lot, that read as if our life depend upon it. And we need preachers that are willing to restructure church and to restructure what we're doing to face the times. I don't want to get off track, and I don't want to insult anybody, and I don't want to seem like we've got the world by the tail here at the Soul Trap. But there is so much nonsense and so much fluff in our Sunday schools, so much nonsense and so much fluff going on. Our people need to be retaught the truth. They need to be retaught the heritage of this nation, the biblical philosophical frameworks that have given us the freedom that we have enjoyed. I also think that believers are going to have to answer some tough questions in the near future. Real tough questions. I mean real tough questions. Questions which most men are not prepared to face and deal with. I mean, if we could not even figure out that we should not let churches close the doors because of forced government interaction, if we couldn't figure that question out, I don't know what the next set of questions are going to be like, because they're only going to be harder. And the next real issue that we are going to face and have to deal with is the issue of neo-Marxism, the communist infiltration of our society by way of the vehicle of two things, and that is the over-militarization of our police, the over-militarization of our government in response to the violence and the widespread Marxism that's coming by way of race. So, what do we do? What is our response? First of all, I think, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we need to get back to reading, studying. Number two, we need to not be afraid to go into our churches and say, okay, wait a second, I understand that we could teach a 52-week series on the book of Leviticus, but we might need to talk about Christian ethics, Christian law, Christian world frame of reference. We need to begin to expect more from our church people and beg them to be more, to see more, to understand more. We need to teach our children. We need to shore up our own home. We need to become more self-reliant. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that there's anything that we can do to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but I do believe that we can begin to prepare. And maybe all of our preparation and all of our work begins with saying, I am not ashamed. I am not ashamed to be a Christian. I am not ashamed to be a Baptist. I am not ashamed to be a Bible-believing, King James-toting preacher. I am not ashamed to be an American. And I am not ashamed to be white. May God bless us all, because we need and can only survive with His blessings.
you're lucky. Run through you, punk.
Hey, where are the white women at?